Hello, in this video I'm going to be discussing some basic chemistry. So basic chemistry hopefully is something that you have at one point been exposed to, whether you are previously you've been in a chemistry class or a physical science class. I know if you were in my physical science back in the day, then this is something that you have visited before. If not, this is something that you need to familiarize yourself, or if it is something you've been exposed to, then you need to revisit it. So in basic chemistry, it talks about basic chemistry in your notes on page 26. I'll pass all the nasty statistics stuff that nobody really likes. Well, some people do. But it starts talking about atoms. So atom means indivisible, which when it comes to matter, it is the smallest unit of an element that maintains the chemical properties of that element. So we are all made of matter, therefore we are all made of atoms. And so what are atoms made of? Well, if you remember, atoms are made of protons, neutrons, and electrons. What type of charge do protons have? Protons have a positive charge. The number of protons determines the identity of the element and defines the atomic number of the element. So for example, hydrogen is number 1 on the periodic table. So therefore, it has 1 proton. Neutrons carry no charge. They are neutral. They are also located in the nucleus with the proton and of similar size. The number of neutrons can change. Atoms of the same element with different numbers of neutrons are called isotopes. So for example, in the case of hydrogen, if you have 1 proton, you recall, and I know what you're thinking, this is Wikipedia, and it's a sin to use Wikipedia, but in this case it's correct. If you have 1 proton in your hydrogen, then you are called protium. And protium is an isomer of deuterium. Deuterium is hydrogen with 2 protons. With a proton and 1 neutron. Tritium is hydrogen, is an isotope with 2 neutrons. So all 3 of these are the same element. They're still number 1 on the periodic table. They're just different isomers of each other. Okay? So then the atomic model that you might think of when you think of an atom, if you're familiar with my profile picture, that's a rough sketch of an atom. Or you may have seen this many times. You have protons with positive charges in the middle, and then neutrons also in the middle in the nucleus. And then around the outside, you have the electrons in different orbital levels. And these electrons on the outside, as you remember, are called, valence electrons. So the electrons exist in what is known as an electron cloud. So Erwin Schrödinger is the scientist who developed what's called the electron cloud model. So this model is an older model called the orbital model, and it works for us to kind of get a grasp of what's going on, especially when atoms bond to each other and react with other things, because that's a big deal in biology. Whenever you do literally everything, atoms are bonding and unbonding and sharing and trading electrons. That's how you live. That's actually what makes you alive. But Schrödinger came up with the electron cloud model. And so here is an example of an actual image of a hydrogen atom. You've probably seen it before, but you'll notice in the middle here, this red-yellow region, this is your nucleus where your proton would exist, and all around the outside, all this light blue is where your electron will exist. And notice I said electron, not electrons. So I say that because I want to bring up a point that the electron is so small and so fast that according to quantum theory, if there is a space, an energy level that the electron can occupy at one time, then it will occupy every space that it can occupy all at one time. That's kind of hard for us. That's very hard for us to grasp. That brings up Schrödinger's cat idea. So I don't know if you're familiar with Schrodinger's cat, but it's basically saying if you put a cat in a box with a radioactive element and poison, then there's a 50-50 chance that the cat will eat the poison or die, or not eat the poison and stay alive. So while it's in the box, we cannot observe it. So we would say it exists in both states. Only if we open the box and look at the cat can we tell what state the cat is in. But cats and electrons, two different things. Electrons are super, super tiny. Whenever you're looking at things that tiny, you get images like this. So to look at things that are tiny, you have to have something that is smaller than that to see it. And so this article talks about quantum microscope, a new technique that the scientists developed to look at this hydrogen atom. You know, if we want to look at cells, we can do so with a light microscope. We can look at cells, bacteria, even viruses sometimes. If we want to get a better image of a virus, like the coronavirus, we use an electron microscope. But you can't look at electrons with an electron microscope, because as soon as you look at them, they move. So they're not there wherever you're trying to look at them at, so you don't get a real image. So we use mathematical equations, or apparently this new type of microscope. So anyways, that is the atom, and is the most is what we would consider in biology the smallest unit of matter. And when you put two or more atoms together, you get molecules. We're going to talk a lot about different types of molecules that you need in your body, that your body uses to stay alive and do other things. And then we have E levels, or E shells, where electrons are located within an atom or molecule. Adding energy to the electrons to make them move farther out, away from the nucleus. Losing energy causes them to move inward. So if we look at our fake image here, if you add energy to these electrons, then they'll move farther out of their energy levels. If we take away energy, they'll move farther in. And then we have valence shells, the outermost electrons. In this image, we have 1, 2, 3, 4 valence electrons. We have 4, 5, 6 total electrons, but 4 valence electrons. And valence electrons are important to understand what they are, because we're going to talk about different types of bonds. And valence electrons are what cause those bonds to happen. These are the most important for chemical bonds. Right here is what I'm reading. These are the most important for chemical bonds and the chemical properties of an element or a molecule. Most elements need 8 valence electrons to meet an octet in order to be chemically stable. Atoms react with other elements in order to obtain a total of 8 valence electrons to become chemically stable. All right, so that is the basic atom. Now, chemical bonds. This is very important for you to understand. Like I said, we're going to talk about a bunch of different types of molecules, like DNA is a huge molecule. In DNA, you find several types of covalent bonds. And notice I say types because there's different types of covalent bonds. A covalent bond is a bond between two, can you guess? Do you remember? Covalent bonds form between what two types of elements? Not metals and nonmetals. They bond between nonmetals and nonmetals. Like when a carbon bonds with another carbon, or a carbon bonds with an oxygen. Those are two nonmetals, so they form a covalent bond. Typically, we say that covalent bonds are sharing valence electrons, and they are very strong bonds. They are harder to break than other types of bonds. So we can have what are called polar molecules. Well, let's back up. Okay, never mind. Let's not back up. Polar molecules carry a slight electrical charge on opposite poles. Poles refer to the ends of the molecule, and non-polar molecules do not have electrical charges. All right, so for polar molecules, think of the Earth and the North Pole and the South Pole. All right, so let me just draw a little image here. So we have Earth, and we have south. So think of one end of the Earth as positive and the other as negative. All right. Now, the most popular polar molecule is H2O, water. So around the hydrogens is a very positive region. Around the oxygen is a very negative region. Oxygen is a very electronegative element. It really badly wants to take electrons, so badly that these two hydrogen molecules here don't even make up for how much electronegativity oxygen has. So then it gives a slight negative region down here on this end, the South Pole, and then at the North Pole, quote unquote, you have a more positive region. So that is a polar molecule, and that's very important to understand whenever we start talking about the chemical properties of water. That's a very big deal in biology. Water is huge. Most living things cannot exist without water, and that's not the case for every living thing, but most. Now, a polar molecule does not have electrical poles. So an example would be oil. When you mix oil and water, they don't mix. They separate, even if you shake them up. Oil doesn't like water. Oil is hydrophobic, so it does not have these poles, but water does stick to other water. So that's why whenever you get oil on you in your clothes or whatever, you need to wash it out with something that is also nonpolar, because nonpolar dissolves other nonpolar. And then we move on to electronegativity, and that refers to an atom's desire to acquire electrons, like oxygen. We say that oxygen and nitrogen are the most biologically important molecules with high electronegativities. Now, they're not the most electronegative elements on the periodic table, but in regards to biology, they are. So we're going to talk about oxygen and nitrogen a lot. They really badly want to take electrons, and that is a good thing because elements like hydrogen are very less electronegative. Actually, hydrogen, as it says here, is the least electronegative element on the periodic table and in biology. So what's the opposite of really wanting to take something? Really wanting to give something. If there were an opposite, then that would be it. So then if I really want to give something and you really want to take something, then maybe we would form a bond, right? So that is why water is so cool. You have those two very unique elements bonding together. And then you have your ionic bonds. These are very important to understand also. Ionic bonds form between a metal and nonmetals. A metal like, let's say, calcium, and non-metal like chlorine, or sodium is a metal and chlorine's a non-metal. Sodium chloride, table salt. Very important to have inside of your body for many different reasons, for which we will talk about at another time. They form when a metal loses an electron and a nonmetal gains an electron. But both atoms do this in order to have 8 valence electrons. So everybody wants 8 valence to be happy and stable. All right, so compounds held together by ionic bonds are salts. So when we say table salt, that is just one type of salt. You have many different types of salts. All right. You have cations versus anions. Cations, which have a positive charge because they have more protons and electrons, and ions are negative charge because they have more electrons than protons. All right, very quickly, I'm running out of time. Hydrogen bonds are very important because they are what hold. I'm running out of time. I have to do another video.